Welcome to Voices of the West from Dusty Saddle. Today we are meeting with author Gary Church, author of the Jack Black Man and Legend series, and seems like at least 20 some odd books there. Gary, thank you for joining us this morning.
Hello, Mr. Diamond. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, my pleasure. Describe yourself a little for our audience.
Well, I'm retired from the military. And after that, I had another complete career as a high school social studies teacher. And then I worked for a number of years as an adjunct professor of political science. Enjoyed all those.
Excellent. And now you are writing.
Sir?
And now you are writing.
Yes, sir. I've written a number of Western novels, and my most successful was the Johnny Black Western Adventure series. When I initially wrote it, I think maybe 5 people read it. And then I was very, very lucky to join forces with Dusty Saddle Publishing and his publicist, Nick Whale. And boy, it launched me. And it's been several years now, and it's still rolling along. And I just can't say enough good things about Dusty Saddle and Nick Whale, the man that, as far as I'm concerned, never sleeps. He's on a different time zone, but I've emailed him in various times just to test, and he's always answered rather promptly.
Yes, I've never known him to sleep either. So for you, what makes a great Western?
Well, I think a Western is no different than any other book or movie. I think it's the story. And, I think it's one of those things. I think everything has to come together. The characters, the dialogue, and the pace of the story. I think what's really great is when everything comes together.
Absolutely. Always a good thing there. When you're starting to actually write something, what comes first to you, the character or the story that you're trying to write?
Yes, sir. Well, for me, it's sort of a theme. There's only so many, I think, in the Western genre that are pretty accepted. The bad guy, the bad sheriff, the outlaws, the train robbers, the mountain men. But I'll decide on a theme. For example, my hero has a goal, and this is his goal. And once I decide that, I build my main character, and I begin to build my supporting characters and along that direction.
Makes sense. When did you first realize you had a talent for writing Westerns?
Well, to be frank, several years ago, I trained and worked very hard at being a screenwriter. And I thought, boy, I really been a lifelong reader and a lifelong lover of movies. And I thought, this is what I want to write a movie, and I want to see it on the screen and all that. And I had no idea, absolutely no idea, that it was almost impossible to get a screenplay made into a movie. I mean, just almost impossible. In fact, as I discovered after I had written a couple, you could not get anyone to read them other than a family or member or friend. I mean, literally no one would read them. It was quite shocking, to be honest. And I finally did get an agent and got it. The first step then is to get a reader to read it, your screenplay, and recommend it to move it on up the chain. And that's called getting a consider. You get a consider. I finally got a consider and went through everything, and the deal fell through for lack of funding, and I was very discouraged. So I decided I would write a book. And I decided on Westerns for the simple reason that I've always liked the idea of the good guy overcoming all the adversity and the bad guy. And it seems like Westerns would be a good vehicle to do that. And also, I'm sure those days were very difficult for humans, and much more difficult than they are now. But it was a simpler time, and it just interests me. So I wrote the first one, and I, family and friends can't really be trusted, to be completely frank with you, but it seemed to get a pretty good reception. And so I sent it into Dusty Saddle, and they liked it. So that's sort of a long answer to your question.
Oh, a good one. You took it into all the places we needed to go to on that. When you're writing a book at this point, do you write it for yourself or do you write it for the readers in mind?
Sir, I think honestly, you first have to write for yourself. Absolutely. But again, the reader is so important. If you want people to read it and enjoy it, you have to keep them in mind. And so, you have to, and I'll say that you have to be clear in your writing. A lot of times you're thinking something or you see something in your mind. And so if you look back at the page and you say, oh, I've got this thought in my mind, I saw what happened in my mind, but you realize you weren't really clear on paper. And so I think that's one of the things, though, you write first, but you definitely have the reader in mind.
What do you think readers are looking for in a Western?
Well, I think it's the same for, honestly. They want to, it's escapism. They want to escape. Uh, I think that there's always something to be learned anytime you read any book, even a work of fiction. There's always facts and things you pick up. They want to be entertained, and they want to get lost in the story. They want to have some feeling there. And I read the reviews, and I think a lot of people say, they when they begin to know the character, that's when they really get interested.
Absolutely. And it keeps your series running very well too. You get them involved and they keep wanting to read more and more from that.
Yes, sir.
And speaking of which, you have a thing that you state that each of your books are standalone and can, they hold their own on as a single title, but they're also good if you read them all in proper sequence for when they were published. What do you think is the best book for someone to start on for reading your books?
My books is the first one would be Fate Rides a Tall Horse. It's the Johnny Black series, and that's probably the best one to start. Now, it was my first book, so I can't say it's from my view, it's not the best written book because it was my first one. I do believe you learn, as you gain experience. I do believe you get better. I think my stories are a little tighter now, and so forth. But I think that's a good place to start. And yeah, you're right. Series are a big thing. Of course, now with the streaming on television, everyone's accustomed to these series, and I personally love them myself. You hate when a season ends, you can't wait for the next season, and that sort of thing. So, and it reminds me of the old pulp fiction that it wasn't just westerns. I guess there were detectives and so forth, and they would write a few pages every week, and people would keep coming back week to week and stuff like that. But yes, definitely Fate Rides a Tall Horse would be the place to start if they wanted to try out my writing.
Excellent. Yeah, it's definitely the way that Dusty Saddles kind of arrange things. We like people to go on a binge kind of a read of a series and have a lot of volume of that they can explore from a writer on that.
Yes,
And
sir.
you've certainly managed to put that all together over the last number of years too. So that's always a great thing for readers to be able to turn to with that. What do you think is the most underexposed and underdeveloped part of the Old West?
Most underdeveloped, underexposed.
Yeah.
Well, that's a very good question that I've never thought of. Um, I think probably there's so much written about the big the big themes. I don't know that it's really been explored on a more personal level about how people lived. Uh, I personally, my relatives, I've actually had the opportunity to use an outhouse and to that sort of thing, and use well water and that sort of things. And I really think that there could be more done on a personal level, how people lived and how they were treated medically and things like that. I think that there's probably some room there for somebody that's can get in there and do the research.
Yes, definitely. Speaking of research, how much goes into your books? When do you start researching and when do you tell yourself time to stop and actually write now?
Well, honestly, sir, I research the whole way through, and it takes me much longer to research something as it does to write it, because I'll sometimes I'll just begin writing and I'll realize that I have to be careful, that I don't mention a can opener before the can opener was invented, or something like that. So research is a constant thing with me throughout the book, and I'll usually get started, and then I usually don't get very far before I begin to say, well, I need to check on this or find out about this.
And there's so much changing at that time period too. Just a couple of years makes a massive amount of difference.
Oh, yes, sir. You're absolutely right. Yes, things rapidly developed. So you have to be careful there.
Yeah. By 1880, we had the first telephones going into Texas. So that was not part of what you think of with the Western so much.
Yes, sir, exactly. And I when I was teaching at the college level, it was quite fun to talk to students about the old party line, where you shared a actual telephone line with other people, and they thought I was making it up, But yeah, first telephones, the party lines, and things like that. It's all very interesting.
And now the kids are pretty much living on doing all that again now. I know my son, whenever he's talking, he's got 5, 6 other people on the same line with him all the time. So we're kind of just going back to where we started.
Yes, sir, for sure.
So how do you feel the Western market is changing?
Well, I think that I've read that, I can't remember if the 60s or 70s, that a lot of Western movies came out, and the market was sort of flooded and kind of fell off, but it has regained itself here recently. I'd say it's changing right now. Most of my readers are a little bit older. Um, and I will say, just in the last few years, and it's because of Amazon and Apple and Barnes and Nobles. The ability to self-publish a book has brought a lot of people into the field. So there's a lot released right now, and that's where Nick Whale earns his money. He gets out there, and now let me ask you. Can I ask you a question?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Were you the guy that designed my book covers for the?
I was, yes.
Exactly. And see, that's how you earned your money, because when you're looking at a page on one of these digital formats, and you see all these Western books. It's those book covers that quite often make the difference. At least get somebody to read a little bit about it and see what it's about. If they can just go right past a book cover, and I think that's extremely important. And you were part of my success there, and my early success with the Johnny Black series, because I know you did 3 covers for me for sure.
3 or 4 at least going things. I know all the way up to whichever the one was with the balancing scales on it in the riverboat. I know I definitely went that far.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
They were
and they were all
covers.
fabulous, and I greatly appreciate it.
Oh, I enjoyed doing your covers. They are very stylistic, and they are very pretty. I was pleased.
You did a great job.
My wife always says that, yeah, the covers are nice, they get your attention, but it's what's on the back of the book that really sells it to a person. And I guess that's really my job, is to just initially spark up someone to try and read more.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Exactly. There's so many now that something has to grab them, and then they hopefully they'll like what they see, and then they'll start reading it, and they'll be hooked.
Yes, absolutely. What kind of Western have you long dreamed of writing that you haven't gotten to yet?
Well, I've pretty much I did a second series involving a Western attorney, and I've always had an interest in the law, so I was able to combine those things. And in my last book, I got in on the Civil War a little bit, which I hesitated to do. There are thousands of experts on the Civil War, and I had to be careful that I didn't say something that was incorrect. But I pretty much covered my books pretty much relate to Texas in some way or another. So I'm pretty happy with what I've done.
Outstanding. Yeah. What are you currently working on?
Well, I'm working on a second book for the book on the start of the Civil War. Honestly, I was about done, but I do get people that email me and say, "When's the next book coming?" And so you feel a little pressure, a little responsibility to your readers to say, "Well, yeah, let me get that second book out there, or third book, or whatever it is they're looking for in the series."
Have you ever had a reader say, "Oh, I wish you hadn't done this to this character in a particular book," or anything like
Oh
that?
yes, yes. I get some interesting reviews and I get some interesting emails. Uh, Probably the most interesting though are there are so many experts. That's why you have to be so careful with your research. I will say in the area of weapons, wow. I mean, you had best be accurate when you're talking about weapons in the West, in the old West, because the readers will call you on it, and and like that sort of thing. So
And particularly if you're going to be touching in Civil War, that's just enormous with just the changes that, it's a war conflict. So you have technological advances going on during it and massive amounts of change in detail and what is happening and what isn't happening with that.
exactly, sir. And a lot of people have different opinions about the war and the battles and what happened, what should have happened, and stuff. So you have to be. I agree. You have to be kind of careful with that stuff because your readers will call you on it.
What's the most valuable piece of advice you can give to someone that's starting out trying to write a book at this point?
Okay. Well, I'll say this. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that said, I've always wanted to write a book or I'm going to write a book, but I haven't yet. I'm waiting or whatever. I say my first bit of advice is to write. And I mean that sincerely. I'm not as a joke. I mean, you have to write. If you're gonna write a book, you have to start. And I think you have to try to be consistent with your writing. And if you can only write for a short period of time every day, then at least do it every day and try to be consistent with it. Um, I know people don't like to hear it, but rewriting is very, very important. When I started, I thought, well, I'm writing pretty well here. I'm not going to need to do rewriting. But when you go back and look, you realize you do have to rewrite. I think if I was starting out, the third thing I would do is I would read a book or two about writing. Matt Braun actually wrote a book on how to write a Western, which is a pretty good book. It's pretty basic, and that's of course what you need when you start out. I would line up my research sources. If you have a connection with a library, they usually will let you get on some of the academic journals. Most states have a state historical association of some sort that you can tap into. Uh, and so I would line up some research sources because research is going to be very, very important. Maybe the last thing I would say is be careful with continuity. Again, your readers will call you if your character is using this weapon in this chapter, and later he's using a different weapon, or he's riding a different horse. They'll call you on that. They'll say, "Hey, what happened here? You didn't explain. Why has he got a different gun, or why has he got his horse have a different name?" Or So I would say sort of get everything ready. I'd start writing immediately if I wanted to write, but I'd just start writing. But while I was doing that, I would start looking at my sources for research and things like that.
Excellent advice on all of that. So, where can readers learn more about you?
About me, sir?
Yes, sir.
Oh, yes, sir. Well, on my Amazon page, I've got a little bit of information there, and I've got a Facebook page, and it's got a few photos and things like that, and that link is on page. But one last bit of advice: if you want to write a Western or science fiction or romance, do your best work, rewrite it, make it the best you can, and then contact Dusty Saddle and hope that they take you on. And if they do, then because one of the biggest problem is honestly is for a new writer is to be read, and I mean that sincerely. That's very, very difficult. It's to get a reader to try a new author is just difficult, and so Nick Wales got his work cut out for him on that, and that's where guys like you that design book covers can help. But that's what I would say to it. So someone that wanted to write one.
Absolutely, yeah. And Nick's got a long formula about how to write things, how to market things, how to put everything together. He's been doing it for a long time and
Yes, sir.
still manages to make money come in. So
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely.
All the changes, algorithms, and whatever else that goes on out there in the world. Yes.
Oh, yes, sir. It's a different world. It really is. The digital world and the internet and that sort of thing.
Well, thank you, Gary Church, for joining us today. Appreciate the time and being able to talk to you on all this.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Diamond, and thank you for the book covers, and I appreciate the interview. I appreciate the opportunity.
My pleasure. Thank you.